It's happening right underneath our noses, but did you catch it? The very first thing I want to talk about is the trillions, yes, I said trillions in stimulus that are being pumped into the system today. The second thing is how businesses are responding to all of the conditions we are facing. I've got a lot to cover in this. You don't want to miss it. Let's begin. Everything I'm about to talk about in this video and all of the previous ones are based on fact. I'm giving you it as direct from the source as possible in all circumstances. This article here is talking about Europe's $1 trillion energy bill only marks the start of the crisis. If you've been on this channel or simply aware of what's happening, you would know that in Europe's case in particular, there's an extreme situation with energy. The prices had gone up rapidly, being so heavily reliant on Russia. And of course, we saw the disruption in the supply. Prices have gone up. Businesses are saying, look, we can't even afford to stay open. They have to close. You look at people not turning their heat on because they're saying, I just can't afford it. High prices could last years and aid is becoming unaffordable. Relief on global gas markets isn't expected until 2026, and that's not even full relief. We'll talk about that more in a second. If you've been on the channel, you know exactly what I'm referring to. Europe got hit by roughly $1 trillion from surging energy costs and the fallout of Russia's war in Ukraine, and the deepest crisis in decades is only getting started. After this winter, the region will have to refill gas reserves with little to no deliveries from Russia, intensifying competition for tankers of fuel. Now that's important, of course, because I have shown you the data that suggests Europe's going to make it through the winter. That won't be an issue. The question is, during that spring summer period, usually they start to stockpile it. But it looks like they can't do that because they're not pulling from Russia anymore. We saw what happened with Nord Stream 2. It began really with Nord Stream 2 as far as I'm concerned, when Germany said, nope, we're not going to certify that. Russia said, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? 2 weeks later, Ukraine happened. And then there's been the disruptions all along with Nord Stream 1 and just constant back and forth, as you are probably aware. Even with more facilities to import liquefied natural gas coming online, the market is expected to remain tight until 2026, when additional production capacity from the US to Qatar becomes available. That means no respite for high prices. So they said we signed a deal, we're going to have Qatar bring us all this energy. It's going to be fantastic. The only issue is it's going to take until 2026 to actually bring that online. While governments were able to help companies and consumers absorb much of the blow with more than $700 billion in aid, a state emergency could last for years. With interest rates rising and economies likely heading into recession, the support that cushioned the blow for millions of households and businesses is looking increasingly unaffordable. And that's really what it comes down to. For a lot of people, they simply look at the information and say, hey, okay, let me see the price of oil right now. No, everything's fine. But when you start to break it down, and that's what I do here on this channel if you're new, is that we get into the reasons why so that you are empowered. You leave knowing the information that's on a deeper level. That's so important. Some people don't think about it like that, but it is. Let me show you. Once you add everything up, bailouts, subsidies, it is a ridiculously large amount of money. It's going to be a lot harder for governments to manage the crisis next year. Look, just take a look. Spiraling costs. Europe's massive tab for securing energy supplies and cushioning consumers from spikes soared past $700 billion by the end of November. Just take a look. Extreme, as far as I'm concerned. Germany, $264 billion. As a percentage of the GDP, that is 7.4. 7.4. Italy, 5.1%. Netherlands, 5.1%. What does this tell you? That they are spending to the levels that are pretty much what we saw in 2020 for these countries. 2020 was an extreme circumstance, wasn't it? Where they were spending billions left, right, and center. Oh, you need billions there? Okay, billions there. Okay, we need billions for this thing. Okay, billions, no problem. Sign on the dot. And it was happening. There was no questions asked. And now today, right underneath our nose, we are seeing the same thing occurring, and it's being told because of the energy crisis that we are experiencing, something I've been covering all along. And that's important because without this stimulus, without 2020 stimulus, the economy would already be in an admitted recession. Right now, they're able to, fudget, if you want to call it that. Government fiscal capacity has already been stretched. About half of the European Union member state debt has exceeded the bloc's limit of 60% of gross domestic product. Remember when the whole Eurozone had these limitations? Do you remember that? Oh, you're only allowed this much of a percent for this factor and this much of a percent for this factor. None of that is gone. Like, that's all thrown out the window. Please. It's gone. The roughly $1 trillion is a broad tally of more expensive energy for consumers and companies, but some will not, but not all, will be offset with aid packages. They go on, okay? This is important, right? But that's Europe. What about in the case of the United States? Congress races to finish a $1.7 trillion spending bill before Christmas. They got to get it in. They're going on vacation. They're going on a little break. So they got to worry and they got to deal with spending $1.7 trillion of taxpayer money. Lawmakers face deadline to okay government funding or face shutdown. This is what happens. Like, they've already said they're going to spend the money. The Congress just has to say, hey, okay. That's the way it works. This is important because this number one, never declines. And number two is when you look at these bills, if anyone has ever seen these bills, oftentimes they are over 1,000 pages. And in that period of time, you would think, they would have many, many weeks and potentially months to read it over, have their people look at it, start to go back and forth with it, maybe make a few changes, and then it would get approved. Actually, it's nothing like that at all. The way that it works is that you have, in most cases, just a few hours to read it and sign on the dot. Does that seem like a good thing to you? No matter what you think. If you're, part of the whole left-right paradigm, you're here, you're there, do you think that's wise to just give hours or maybe in some cases a few days? I don't know. I'll leave that up to you. Here you can see with what's happening, I wanted to show you that in a second. The massive bill expected to total around $1.7 trillion could be released as early as Monday. It would fund government agencies and programs and allow these agencies to distribute the grants and contracts to the private sector. Hey, we just want to help people. We just want to help them out. It's just crazy. Anyway, guess who gets a nice big chunk of it though? Take a look. Can you see that? Lawmakers have agreed to fund military programs at $858 billion. Let me repeat that again. $858 billion, and that is nearly $100 billion up from where it was before. So who wins? Cui bono? Who stands to gain? Every single time. The MIC. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's an industrial complex of, what I'm trying to say here? Yeah. And who loses? It's the people. New York City's homelessness hits record number. So the point I'm trying to make with this is that they're spending literally trillions of dollars in Europe. They're spending trillions of dollars in the US, and it's basically all over the world. And yet, who gets the money? Do the people who actually need it get it? New York City homeless at a record. What about the people who are, let's say, less privileged? Do they get the money? Maybe around that poverty line, somewhere in there, maybe just above it, maybe just below it. Do they get helped? No. Maybe they get $300 here, they get $600 there. It's the military-industrial complex. Oops, I said it. They get half of this bill, just like that. Here you go. Here's some money for you. Unbelievable. Let me break this all down for you right now. The economic impact of rising energy prices and government spending trillions will be far-reaching. Historically, government stimulus plans have been used to jumpstart a sluggish economy and restore consumer confidence. However, the effectiveness of a stimulus package depends on how it is structured and implemented. The Troubled Assets Relief Program, TARP, passed in 2008 as a response to the Great Recession, was a $700 billion bailout package which supposedly helped stabilize the banking and financial industry. The program was intended to prevent an even worse economic crisis. However, it was criticized for lack of oversight, transparency, and accountability. The CARES Act was passed in 2020, providing $2.2 trillion in stimulus funds for individuals, businesses, and state and local governments. This package provided direct payments to individuals, expanded unemployment benefits, and provided loans to small businesses. While the CARES Act was claimed to be successful in stabilizing the economy, there were reports of the funds being misused or wasted. For example, some local governments used the funds to pay for luxury items such as golf carts and massage chairs. It is important to consider the economic impact of energy prices and government spending when designing a stimulus package. Rising energy prices can lead to higher costs of goods and services, which can hurt consumer spending and economic growth. Government spending can be beneficial, however, it must be targeted and monitored to avoid wasteful spending and to ensure that the funds are used for their intended purpose. Now, do we ever see the intended purpose? It is highly unlikely to ever be the case. It would be wishful thinking, I would say. Look here, as you see it right now, we are understanding what China is doing. China at this time, they're opening up. They are not in the same circumstance they were before. They're allowing people to go out. Some in Beijing and Shanghai are simply staying home. They're concerned. But you can see that as a result, investors are looking towards China and they are putting their money in. That's what this article talks about here. And I think it's important to see how investors are reacting. They are clearly very bullish on the opportunity. You want to stay away from highly indebted companies right now. I do agree with this. Quote, companies with high debt loads that are sensitive to higher interest rates should be avoided. Very key, very important. Essentially, right now, interest rates are rising, and that's what you want to be careful of. Many people have pointed to the fact that the pattern in the market looks a lot like 2008 and 2009, and quite frankly, we see this a lot, but I just want to show you here, take it with a grain of salt. It really mirrors what we're seeing today. Of course, you can look at, in this case here, S&P earnings. So stock earnings year over year have declined considerably, and that generally follows along with South Korea's exports. It's pushed ahead 6 months. And basically that's kind of like a telltale sign when we look at what happens with South Korea. I've shown you this before, but now it's kind of moving in that direction. The expectation, of course, is recession, and we know that to be the case. This is giving us basically the whole article is about how we are not going to see the 2008 housing crisis because people have built up a lot of equity. I would just say if interest rates are to remain high for a long period, then this is totally going to change because they're trying to say that people have built up a lot of equity. But in the way I look at it is kind of phantom equity, because if the prices fall considerably, then that really won't be the case, okay? But we know that debt is very high. They just compare that to the equity to kind of offset that. And this is just showing us PMIs. When you look at manufacturing, when you see what's happening today, we are in a contractionary phase. That's shown on this chart as well, and here as well. You look around the world. These are just different places around the world. Since basically mid-2021, we have trended downward, okay? That's all. That's all. So we can see it from a high level. I wanted to break that down for you. I hope that you found this interesting. If you did, then what you have to do is join me on a daily basis as I take you through all of this information. I break it down, make it super simple. And so all you got to do is hit that subscribe button down below. I'll see you tomorrow.